A lot can happen in a week. I've been thinking a lot about Holy Week. How on Sunday you can feel like you're on top of the world, and by Friday you've literally been crucified. And when we look at what's going on in different parts of the world and even this country right now, it can kind of feel like that. I'm sure for so many people in New York City right now, that's what this feels like. This is what it probably feels like in Italy. And for the rest of the country, it's almost like we're in this slow motion as we can see this wave coming towards us, and yet there's not a lot we can do about it. It's like there's this silent killer that we know is going to sweep through some of us. We know that it's already inside some of us, and yet all we can do is wait for that day when you wake up and realize you have a fever. And so the entire world is on lockdown. The entire world. And I said this a few weeks ago, this has never happened. That billions of people literally are all having the same experience at the same time, individually, together. And at the same time, in the Western Christian faith tradition, this is the beginning of Holy Week. This is the week in Christian theology when transformation happens. On Sunday, you have one paradigm of power. 1 week later, that paradigm of power is completely shattered. On Monday, you have one understanding of loyalty and friendship. By Thursday, that sense of loyalty and friendship is replaced with betrayal. The beauty of Holy Week is that it offers us, as humanity, it offers us a ritual process that allows us to encounter and embrace every human emotion. It doesn't gloss over the pain. It doesn't gloss over the fear or the betrayal or the shame or the inner feelings of guilt and regret. It embraces all of it and puts it in a context that allows us to come out on the other side. I think the problem is when we're not willing to acknowledge or express what's really inside of us, then it gets buried and it becomes a malignancy. I know that not all of us are Christians, or many of us don't even necessarily come from a Christian tradition. And so some of this terminology may feel a bit foreign to you. But I think this week it might be helpful to look at what Holy Week represents and how the ritual of acknowledging the whole of the human experience can help us navigate these uncertain times that we find ourselves in 2,000 years later. Today is Palm Sunday. For those of you who know the story, this is the day when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, with people lining the streets, cheering for him, and waving palm branches. There was the expectation and hope that he was going to be their new earthly king. There was the expectation and hope that he was going to fix things and stand up to the Roman Empire on their behalf. There were all types of projections of what Jesus was going to do for them. On this day, this Sunday, there was still an understanding that earthly physical power over was what was needed or wanted. And we have some of that playing out today. We are seeing exactly what happens when a few people have power over everybody else. It can be exhilarating for the person in power. That person can go on TV every day. That person can say, I have access to thousands of ventilators, but I think I'll just have the states bid on them against each other. That's very powerful. It's powerful, well, I guess it's a sense of power to stand up and say, we're doing our job, and as an example of that, I know of a hospital that didn't have masks until the CEO called me, and then I, as the president's son-in-law, got them masks. That's great if you have a one-on-one relationship with the person in power. This is the type of power that was an illusion and was transitory 2,000 years ago. And it's the type of power that's transitory today. It's a paradigm that does harm, no doubt. No doubt people are dying today in real time because of this type of power by a few. It's the type of power that leads to death, destruction, and in Christian theology, a literal crucifixion. And if that was the whole story, it would be terrifying. But that's not the whole story. That's simply the backdrop of the story. That's the paradigm in which Holy Week begins. But we have to remember that was only Sunday. There's so much that happens in the days between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday. I often wonder what Jesus thought as he was riding into town and seeing all these people projecting all of their expectations and hopes onto him as their new king. As I said, there can be something exhilarating about being placed on a pedestal. But the people who understand true power also know that being placed on a pedestal is the most terrifying place to be, because they understand that the pedestal is an illusion, and just as quickly as somebody puts you up there, they will knock you off. And so my guess is that Jesus knew the pedestal was never where he was meant to be. And so he continued on, riding through the crowds, probably instead of feeling joyful and powerful. My guess is that he continued on with a sense of resignation, combined, I'm sure, with compassion and love, because he understood where true, authentic power comes from. He already knew he was never meant to be an earthly king. Earthly power is of the ego. The story of Easter is one of the power of the Spirit. Those are two very different things. And so he writes on. And he makes it to Thursday. During Holy Week, this is referred to as Maundy Thursday, the Last Supper. This is the day when Jesus had one last meal with his disciples, his friends. He ate with them, drank wine with them, and then he kneeled down and he washed their feet. What was he thinking? What was he feeling? Did he know what was about to happen? Did he realize that in 24 hours he would no longer be alive? This year, perhaps, we can connect with this feeling in a way that in past years may have been harder to relate to. We can feel the storm coming. We don't quite know what it's going to look like, but there's a calm, and in that calm, there may be even a peacefulness, a sense of resignation, a sense of betrayal, and included with that calm and that resignation and that betrayal is also compassion, understanding, and love. And there's also a choice. At this point, on this Thursday night, Jesus could have still turned and walked away. But he didn't. Instead, he had one last dinner with his friends, and then he kneeled down and he washed their feet. And I think about this as in the course of a few weeks, we've gone from not touching people to not congregating with people, to not being around people, to not even wanting to breathe near somebody without a mask. And all of this makes sense as we are still at that place of decision. Which road will we ultimately take? We have, in the last month, a few roadmaps already. We have the roadmap of what happened in China and Iran and Italy, and we see the roadmap that New York is on. And at the same time, we have this role model of Jesus kneeling down and washing his disciples' feet, even though one of them had already betrayed him. One of them, his best friend Peter, would deny him, and the others would simply fall asleep and abandon him. And in this space-time year 2020, we have our own images of heroes and love and compassion. We have heroic doctors and nurses and EMT and paramedics and firefighters risking their own lives to save the lives of neighbors and patients. They know that they don't have the protective covering they need to protect themselves from this virus, and yet they put on a handmade handkerchief and scarf and go into work anyways, caring for person after person, hoping to save as many lives as they can before they are simply overwhelmed. We have 30-year-old doctors writing out their wills, in essence saying, I'm going to reach out to you while I can, care for you, cleanse you, offering you my human compassion and love, even if it means this time next week I might not be here, because I know that I may be the only human contact you have left. And in the midst of all of this, the betrayal has already taken place. Even as he is getting his feet washed, Judas knows that he has already betrayed his friend. We all know that for whatever reason, the ventilators that New York needs are not going to arrive in time. Yes, our country is being betrayed, and for anybody with eyes to see, it is clearly an inside job. And at the same time, as our illusion of power is shattered, this is also when true power begins to rise. When millions of people throughout the world look at the crumbling power structures that aren't working for any of us and say, oh, hell no. The seamstresses are saying, do you need masks? I'm getting out my sewing machine and I'm making masks. The engineers are saying, oh, hell no. You need more ventilators? I'm going to learn how to split them. The scientists are saying, oh, hell no. We need a vaccine. We got this. The restaurants are saying, no, our healthcare workers are hungry. Let's feed them. This is power. This is the collective power of people who care. And that is a way that cannot be stopped ever by any politician or any self-serving policy. We have these examples of what true power is this week, of what true leadership is. It's a Navy captain who risks his career by breaking rank and sending out an SOS letter in order to save his naval crew. True power is thousands of his sailors standing and cheering for him as he is escorted off the ship for that act of courage. This week is our Holy Week. It is not just a Christian metaphor. We're living it. And then we come to Friday, otherwise known as Good Friday. This is the last day that we get to rage and feel and express the anger, the fear, the darkness, the desolation, the hopelessness. All of these emotions are part of the human experience, and you can't ever get to healing if you don't move through those emotions. A lot of people like to gloss over the crucifixion. But Good Friday is when we get to name the fact that we're human and that this world hurts, that life hurts. We get to name that being human can be painful. For too long, so many of us have been hiding our pain or glossing over it or rationalizing it. And we can't do that anymore. Italy learned that a few weeks ago. New York is learning that this week. Many of us are watching with trepidation, wondering, are we next? What can we do? Is this inevitable? Yes and no. Yes, and the extent that as we see, we are all impacted by this virus. And no, we don't have to enter into fear and horror and terror. But it's okay. It's really, really okay to acknowledge the fear, to acknowledge the grief, to acknowledge the anger and the pain, to name the losses. And so the question becomes, what do we do with it? Because we don't want to get stuck on Good Friday. Because if you leave the story there, it becomes a nightmare. But the story doesn't end there. And that's why we have Easter. This is why we have spring. It's okay to sit in the stillness. It's okay to be in the uncertainty. The president is using war language. He says we are at war with this virus. We're not at war. That's an old, unhelpful paradigm that very obviously is no longer working for us as a collective humanity. This isn't a war. This is transformation. It just depends on if we are willing to allow the transformation process to happen so that we can truly be resurrected and come out on the other side. And I have no doubt that when we understand the true inner power that each one of us has individually and collectively, we are all going to be just fine because we will do it together. Amen.